My boyfriend was transferred to my office, and that's where our paths first crossed. As I held a senior position, I had to keep things professional, but I quickly discovered his cheerful demeanor and sharp sense of humor. We interacted a few times at formal dinners, and those moments deepened my feelings for him. One day, I boldly asked for his number, marking the beginning of our conversations. I had already developed a crush and was eager for a relationship, but I wanted to gauge his feelings first. As we started spending more time together, I was even more taken with him. This allowed us to truly connect. A few weeks later, he asked me out on a date, and I eagerly accepted. That first date felt like a dream, the best day of my life. After about 2 months of dating, I suggested he move in with me, not only to maintain a professional boundary at work but also because I simply wanted to be closer to him. Once we moved in together, we felt like the most compatible couple imaginable. He was a kind and caring man, often fretting over the smallest things, which only made him cuter. We consistently made efforts to ensure each other felt special and did everything we could to bring each other joy. My family included my mom and younger brother, who lived nearby, while his parents resided in his hometown. He had met my family several times, and they adored him just as much as I did. However, since his parents lived far away, I hadn't had the opportunity to meet them. He mentioned that they were quite strict and protective, so I knew impressing them wouldn't be easy. I assured him that my feelings for him were genuine, and I respected his family, regardless of their disposition. On my birthday, he proposed, and I couldn't say no. I immediately accepted and hugged him tightly. He expressed his desire to marry within 2 months, and I enthusiastically agreed. He needed to inform his parents about our engagement, so he planned a trip to his hometown that weekend. When he returned, he appeared troubled. His family was far from supportive. They were furious that he hadn't discussed the proposal with them beforehand. I suggested that we go and talk to them. Perhaps if they got to know me, they would change their minds. My boyfriend reached out to his parents, but his mother flatly refused to meet me, insisting he could do whatever he wanted. He made another attempt to gain their approval, but they wouldn't even engage with him. They felt overlooked and thought their son had lost his ability to make decisions independently. When he came back, he reassured me that he didn't care about their disapproval. He was confident in his choice. He declared we would get married, regardless of his parents' stance. We began planning our wedding, but my mother voiced her concerns, warning that his parents could create trouble for us later. I insisted that I trusted my boyfriend, and if he was willing to take a stand, I should support him rather than doubt him. Our wedding was a small, intimate affair attended by close friends and family. I felt like the happiest bride, and I knew my husband felt like the luckiest groom. We decided to inform his parents about our marriage after returning from our honeymoon. A week later, we set off for our honeymoon and had an incredible time together. Upon returning, my mother reminded us that we needed to tell his family soon, as delaying the conversation would only make matters worse. My husband called his parents, letting them know we had married a couple of weeks ago and were eager to see them. Their response was harsh. They claimed that since he had chosen another family over them, he could remain with that family because they would never accept him again. This news weighed heavily on my husband, and his parents continued to ignore his calls. Finally, a week later, they responded, but their tone remained rude. He stood firm, telling them he was old enough to make his own choices and didn't need their approval or support. Meanwhile, they threatened to cut ties with him if he continued down this path. However, they eventually invited us to their home, which gave my husband hope that they might be willing to reconcile. I wasn't convinced that this was a good sign. Just days earlier, they had been verbally attacking me and accusing me of having a hold over their son. I expressed my concerns to my husband, wondering if they might have ulterior motives. He dismissed my worries, claiming I was overthinking and merely exhausted. My mother suggested they were likely trying to mend their relationship with him, realizing they couldn't afford to lose their only child. That evening, we visited my mother-in-law's house, where they had prepared a lavish dinner. They greeted us warmly, complimented my appearance, and expressed their happiness to see me. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, believing they were beginning to accept us as a couple. I thought perhaps they were merely protective of their son. However, as the dinner progressed, my mother-in-law began inquiring about my family. When I mentioned that I had a mom and a brother, she bluntly asked if my father had passed away. I explained that my parents had separated long ago due to my father's trust issues. To my shock, she remarked that if my dad had doubts about my mom, there must have been a reason for it. Ignoring her insinuation, she continued to assert that women with such character destroy families. In that moment, I lost my temper. "How dare you say that?" I shouted, my voice trembling with anger. My husband attempted to defuse the situation, but I was beyond reasoning. I demanded a divorce right then and there. We left the house in a hurry, and once we got home, I locked myself in my room, feeling overwhelmed. After a while, my husband called my mom to talk to me, and with her gentle encouragement, I finally opened the door. You might think I knew I overreacted, but I couldn't help it. My mother had endured a toxic relationship with my father and worked tirelessly to raise me and my brother. Hearing a single word against her was unbearable. She had always told me to disregard the opinions of those who didn't matter and to focus on the love and support of my husband, who was right there beside me. After she left, my husband apologized for his mother's behavior but gently pointed out that asking for a divorce on the spot had hurt him. He promised me he wouldn't engage with his parents until they offered an apology. A week later, my mother-in-law called my husband, wanting to see him. He firmly refused, insisting that he wouldn't visit until she apologized. This infuriated her, and she lashed out, accusing him of being the worst son for disrespecting his parents, who had sacrificed so much for him. He stood his ground, telling her they didn't have the right to control his life and that an apology was necessary or he would risk losing their relationship altogether. After that call, his mother bombarded him with texts, claiming I was trying to pull him away from his family. Frustrated, I took his phone and called her, warning her to stop her attacks or there would be consequences. Despite my warning, she persisted, trying to paint me in a negative light. A few days later, my father-in-law reached out to apologize for the turmoil, admitting that my mother-in-law would never accept me. He expressed his embarrassment over her comments about my mom and wished he could have stepped in sooner. My husband reassured him that he understood and held no ill feelings toward him. My father-in-law then asked to meet, and my husband agreed to visit him that weekend. When my husband went to see his dad, the atmosphere was calm until my mother-in-law showed up. She immediately made her demands known, stating that she would only accept me if I severed all ties with my mom, whom she deemed a bad influence. My husband's anger flared. He told her that if she continued with her disrespectful behavior, he would cut ties with her. He warned her that if she didn't mind her own business, she would end up alone. I was taken aback by his fierce defense of me. Watching him stand up to his mother with such conviction showcased his strong character. He refused to let anyone belittle my mom, proving his unwavering support for me. Dealing with my mother-in-law was no easy feat. She was obsessed with her son and utterly self-absorbed, incapable of acknowledging anyone else in his life. She acted as if she owned his existence simply because she had raised him. My husband and I consistently stood up to her rudeness, but it was clear that she had little understanding of love and respect. My husband, at 37, and I, at 34, had been together for 4 years and married for 2. He had a deceased son from a previous relationship, while I had a son from my former marriage. Although my husband and my son, who is 16, got along well, they didn't spend much time together. My husband attributed this to school activities, friends, and homework. but I couldn't shake the feeling that if he truly wanted to, he could make more time for my son. Every week, my husband visits his son's grave, spending a couple of hours there with his phone turned off. Last week marked the anniversary of his son's death, coinciding with my son's football match. I thought it would be a perfect opportunity for my husband to spend some quality time with my son. He mentioned that he had already spoken with him, and my son preferred to go with his friends instead. I suggested we all attend the game together, but he insisted that my son should enjoy his time with friends and that he needed to visit his son's grave on that important day. I reasoned that since we had already commemorated the occasion at home, the visit might not be necessary. He took offense at my suggestion, adamant that visiting the grave was essential, especially on such a significant day. An argument erupted, and in my frustration, I told him he should make more of an effort to spend time with his stepson. He countered by saying that his son mattered too, and unless I had lost a child, I couldn't possibly understand. His words stung deeply, as it felt like he was implying that I didn't love my stepson as my own and was using this against me during our argument. He stormed out, leaving me with my thoughts and ignoring my calls. When my son returned home, I vented my frustrations to him. To my surprise, he advised me that I was being too hard on his stepdad, who clearly had a lot on his plate. He thought I was overreacting and being paranoid for no reason. He reassured me that his stepdad did care for him and made an effort, but that didn't mean they had to be inseparable. I felt conflicted, despite my belief that I realize now that I may have been hard on my husband. It feels like he isn't making a genuine effort to spend more time with my son, and I can't shake the feeling that my son's defense of him was just a way to get me off his back. I'm uncertain and could really use some outside opinions on the matter. As a 20-year-old woman, I find myself navigating a different challenge with my 35-year-old sister-in-law. She recently asked me to dye my hair back to a natural color because my 14-year-old niece wants to dress like me. I have bright blue hair, a color I adore. I've always been drawn to an alternative style and never saw an issue with it until now. My niece and I share a close bond, likely because I'm an adult closer to her age. She's taken an interest in how I dress and looks up to me while figuring out her own identity, which I think is sweet. Unfortunately, her mother seems to have a different perspective. My niece recently started asking for streaks in her hair, and her persistent pleas have apparently annoyed my sister-in-law. The color she wants is the same vibrant blue as mine, which is why my sister-in-law is now directing her frustration at me. One day, she messaged me, asking me to tone down my look because it was influencing her daughter. She expressed concern that people might think her daughter was a degenerate, like so many kids in our generation. I took that as a personal insult because if colorful hair makes one a degenerate, then that's how my sister-in-law views me. I politely told her that I wasn't comfortable changing my appearance just to suit her preferences. I tried to explain that my niece was simply trying to discover her own identity. This only made my sister-in-law angrier. She felt I should want what was best for her child and accused me of being a terrible aunt and role model if I let people judge my niece for copying my punkish look. I was deeply offended. I love my niece, she's family, and I strive to be a positive influence in her life. I believe I'm a good role model and that I offer her a safe space to come to for support. Apparently, though, my blue hair made me a bad aunt in my sister-in-law's eyes. I told her that my role was to be a loving support system rather than a rigid role model and suggested she have a conversation with her daughter about what she really wants instead of attacking me. This only escalated her anger, and she declared that my niece wouldn't be allowed to visit as often until I stopped dressing like a degenerate. I felt heartbroken at the thought of losing time with my niece, but I refuse to change who I am for anyone. My husband stands by me, but my mother-in-law thinks I'm being unreasonable. Yes. Nothing convinces a teenage girl to conform like refusing to indulge even the smallest expression of individuality. I encourage you to keep being yourself. There's likely more to your niece's admiration for you than just the small age gap. Even if you were to change your hair color, I bet there are kids at school with wild hair colors who inspire her every day. These days, colorful hair is becoming more mainstream. And I even know a woman in her 70s with purple and blue streaks who lectures at church on Sundays. Hair color is a temporary expression, and your sister-in-law is being silly if she thinks that dyeing your hair will change anything.